So today we've got a patient, Robert Lepore, who's going to be talking with us about his experiences. Thank you for joining us, Robert. And Jeannie is operating the machine because I found out the hard way that we've made some changes in our technology. So bear with us. We will get a good show done today. Jeannie, if you'll take us to the next slide. There you go. So if you haven't been on our channel before, we're basically providing content on the things that kill you or disable you, but your doctors don't know about. And that's not just some YouTube doctor saying that. It's well documented in the evidence and the science. Sort of things we cover basically have to do with cardiovascular health. Last week, for example, we covered 5 things you don't know about fructose. Before that, we covered the #1 risk factor for Alzheimer's, and we've talked a few times about high triglycerides. This time about high triglycerides and plaque reversal using supplements. So if you'll go to the next slide, Jeannie. And the next. So the last 2 slides basically are just showing that we do, as we've done for the past, 8 years, we're providing care, direct pay with patients, and we're now accepting Medicare as well. Next slide. Jeannie, you want to tell us a little bit about what you are and what you do?
I would be happy to, Dr. Brewer. I am a nurse practitioner, and some people know what nurse practitioners are and some people don't. So we decided that we would just kind of go through the history of nurse practitioners and what happens and how they're trained. Nurse practitioners are first registered nurses, and then after we go to a master's program, sometimes doctorate now, but master's program, we become advanced practice registered nurses. So we have a 4-year bachelor's degree, and then we go on to get our master's, which is, at least 3 more years. We are board certified. Nurse practitioners, when they're in school, they're different tracks. There's adult, there's women's, family, geriatric, a variety of tracks. So you go in a certain track, and then you have the same classes in general, but then your clinicals are different and your boards are different. In some universities, the same faculty that teaches the med school students teaches the nursing students. I went to University of Missouri, Kansas City for my grad school, which is also one of the schools that, one of the few schools in the country that has a 6-year med program. So they have a 6-year medical school program where kids come out of high school at 18 and then go 6 solid years. They don't take summers off, and they are MDs at the end of that. So a lot of the same educators that worked over with the med students, they also taught our courses, our advanced pathophysiology, advanced pharmacology, that kind of thing. I also, my undergrad was at St. Luke's College in Kansas City, and that was a teaching hospital. And so, of course, you learn a lot in teaching hospitals. You're educated with the residents, and so it's pretty extensive. Spent a lot of time in hardcore clinicals and cardiovascular ICUs. Wouldn't send out graduation announcements for fear of not making it through. So it was pretty rigorous. And so I think it's good just sometimes for people to understand kind of the level that we go through.
I think so too. And I'll make a couple of comments. As many of us on the show know, I've been a career CMO, Chief Medical Officer, and I helped run MD Live, where we had 700 docs. I was the Chief Science Officer for K Health, where they had about, the Chief Credentialing Officer, and built the credentialing program, still work with K Health as a consultant, a couple of thousand docs and nurse practitioners. One of my, I guess you would say my second retirement, I was the chief medical officer for a company called Premise. They provide on-site health care, primary care for most of the Fortune 500, a couple of thousand docs and nurse practitioners. Now, it never ceases to tickle me to see a population's reaction to nurse practitioners. I remember when we set them up and introduced them to the Toyota population, and the folks at Toyota were very spoiled. They had the best of the best always. And so we kept getting the feedback that this is not going to work very well. And you get that. You get that comment. And in fact, you get that label of mid-level practitioner until they actually start working with you. And then they realize that there's a couple of very interesting trends that you tend to see with nurse practitioners that you don't with docs. Number one, yes, doctors have been trained a lot, usually longer. Unfortunately, as a doctor, I can attest to a huge portion of that being theoretical. I remember being so frustrated after my second year of medical school that I'd had about 2 hours of instruction from a person who was actually a doctor that had actually laid hands on a patient. The rest of it was learning the theory behind PhDs in physiology and anatomy and biochemistry and things that really aren't medicine. They're background information, but they're not medicine. So that tends to float through the rest of the profession as well. Doctors tend to be a bit theoretical. They tend to be, because they're theoretical, they tend to think, I got this, I know this, I'm going to do what I know needs to be done. Whereas nurse practitioners tend to listen better. They tend to listen better to direction, but they also tend to listen to patients better. And as patients start getting more and more accustomed to working with nurse practitioners, they do appreciate being listened to. So any response to that, Jeannie?
Well, I know that you have great respect for nurse practitioners and Dr. Brewer, and that is much appreciated. I think that what people don't always understand about us is that we were nurses first. And so we had to spend time as a nurse on the floor, listening, doing, observing, taking orders, all of those things. So we don't take it lightly. And we know that it comes with a large responsibility. And we do listen differently. We hear differently because of our training. I don't know. We listen to the tiny symptoms. We want to find the answers. We're always trying to, investigate the problem. Not that physicians aren't, but based on experience, real life experience, I think it broadens the horizons. So I'm a nurse practitioner advocate. Of course, I am one. But and my whole life, I wanted to be a physician, and my paths turned different directions, and I became a nurse and then a nurse practitioner. But I think that was what I was meant to do.
Well, I'm glad you're with us. You've shown incredible skill sets, one of the best ones being knowing how to listen. And again, that's a challenge to find that among physicians. I think the best teams, always have thought the best teams include both groups, because you do need to have a little bit more of the theoretical understanding in some situations. But about 80% of the time, you really need to, listening is more valuable between the two. When you look at actual quality scores and quality activities, you tend to find the poorest results among U.S. trained physicians. And here's one of the major reasons for it. They tend to look things up less. They tend to think they know it all, and they tend to have a little bit of arrogance, which is it's very common. We're all humans. We all tend to float that way. And if you've got the advantage of being able to be a little bit arrogant and not look things up, you often get bit. And unfortunately, it's not just the doc being bit, it's the patient as well. So again, very happy to have you on board. If you'll take us to the next slide, we'll talk about something that's a little bit more a supplement, vitamin A. Now, a lot of people, I'm concerned that a lot of people are going to read this or hear this and say, oh, you know what? I need to make sure that I get a whole bunch of vitamin A. Be careful. Vitamin A is like vitamins D and niacin, B3. It's something you can take too much of. You can have dangerous impacts. So before you go out and start buying a bunch of vitamin A after hearing this, be careful. Make sure that you look at the labels and don't take more. It's not one of those things where if a little bit's good, a whole lot's a whole lot better. Not with those 3 supplements. So this was from an article on the physiology of obesity section of the American Journal of Physiology, and back in December of last year. They were looking at vitamin A metabolism, and they looked at it specifically compared to type 2 diabetes and mitochondrial dysfunction. They compared, now this was a lab animal study, mice. They compared mice under genetic vitamin A storage deficiency with low vitamin A, high-fat diet, and enough vitamin A with a high-fat diet. After 20 weeks, the RNA gene sequencing revealed that vitamin A is required for expression of genes involved in cardiac fatty acid oxidation, glycolysis, and mitochondrial oxidative phosphorylation. So, yes, it is required. It is a cofactor in terms of some of the genetic expression. Don't read that as, again, a little bit, if a little bit's good, a whole lot's better. That's not the kind of mechanism you see with this kind of thing, where it's basically a cofactor for genetic expression. Jesus thought this was interesting to cover, and I agree with him. Sometimes it's hard to disagree with Jesus. Next slide. Okay, if you'll take us to the water ball, we're going to talk about Robert Lepore's experience. So, Robert, just a couple of comments about your background.
Yes.
There's a little bit of engineering in there, isn't there?
There is. I've been a civil and structural engineer for the last 45 years. I've been working in the United States, overseas. I've worked on any manner of project, both horizontal and vertical. I've actually worked in Antarctica, Europe, Asia, Australia, United States, and primarily for a bunch of my career in the Middle East, working on military bases, civilian bases, so forth and so on. So I'm in one of those very intriguing fields. I'd like to say it's one of the oldest professions. It goes back to Julius Caesar. And the fact of the matter is, it's something that I enjoy. It's still my pastime. Whereas I'm retired, I'm still a consultant because, frankly, I love what I do. It gives me what I call a significant purpose, which I've always believed is one of the cornerstones to good health.
I don't know if you saw our series on it, but I've believed that as well. We did a series on purpose and life. There's a couple of big studies, one on the folks that survived the Holocaust, that were in the prison camps, the German concentration camps. It wasn't the healthiest ones that survived. It was the ones that had a purpose. More recently, there was a survey that was done in terms of longevity and people's health and purpose. And yet again, having a purpose. And this, with the way the study was done, you could grade levels of commitment to purpose. And it wasn't just a single connection. It was right along the line. It's what in epidemiology we call a dose response curve. In other words, the stronger your sense of purpose, the more likely you are to live longer. I'm going to need to step away for just a second. Something's happening here in my house, in my studio. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and take it away for a second.
Okay, I'll do that. Well, first thing, Jeannie, I'd like you to know that a nurse practitioner is my primary caregiver. And it was the nurse practitioner that really sent me on the path that I currently am on. It isn't the doctor that I had been seeing for decades. So to put this in context for the listeners, if we were having this call 5 years ago, I was 200 to 210 pounds. I'm 5'8". And frankly, I had had that weight for much of my career, much of my life. I used to diet. I was in a diet, out of diet. The fact of the matter is, as they say, dieting is easy. I've done it 100 times, but 5 years ago, I was about 200 pounds. And just to put that in context, today I weighed myself, I'm 157 pounds. And I've been 157 pounds for the past 4 years. And in large part, and I'll get into that over the next few minutes, it's because of Dr. Brewer and the program that he's had and the great advice and recommendations and support that he has given me over these last several years. So how did this happen? Well, I went to see my doctor to get my annual physical, as I had done for many years. I went there and I was told the doctor was called away to the emergency room. So sorry, but if you want, the nurse practitioner could give you your exam. And I paused and I thought, well, I've seen my doctor for years. And I said, okay, I'll go see Jeannie. Not Jeannie as in here, but the nurse practitioner. And a funny thing happened. She started to talk to me. And the next thing I know, we were chatting for the next 20 or 30 minutes. That had never happened with the doctor. By now, I would have been long gone, being told, you're looking good, you're solid, literally, and we'll see you in a year. But the nurse practitioner, and I can't quite remember why, she said, I really think you should go and get a cardio calcium score test. And I thought about it. I paused. I didn't really question it. She gave me that. And I actually scheduled the test. As an engineer, I guess I love data. I love information. So I took the test, went to a local hospital. It was very easy, very convenient. And I said, how did I do? And they said, well, we'll give you the score. It'll be put on your account with the local hospital. You'll be able to access it. 3 days later, I went in there on my own, and all of a sudden it showed I have a calcium score of 540. That didn't sound good. I looked it up, and I started to look at all these sources, and I concluded, I think I'm in big trouble, because the Framingham, and they have a formula, and they're saying, man, over the next several years, I'm largely going to have a major event. To tell you the truth, I kind of went into a meltdown. I called up my doctor. I need to talk to you. I finally got to see my doctor, and his initial reaction was he got genuinely annoyed with me. Why did I take the test? I got the sense that he was going to chew out the nurse practitioner for issuing this test. He was decidedly negative, and frankly, he didn't even want to answer any of the questions that I had, other than, the name of the cardiologist and go see the cardiologist. 3 weeks later, I saw the cardiologist, and I talked for about 2 minutes. The cardiologist says, you need to do a stress test. So I took the stress test. again, abbreviating the timeline here, with one of those nuclear dyes. And when I saw the cardiologist, again, of course, I came with my list of questions. The cardiologist said, "We've checked your arteries. The good news is you don't have any significant blockages. So you're good to go. You passed the stress test. Great. And we'll see you in a year." I have to tell you, when I left that, I felt completely abandoned. It's okay. These sources are saying I have serious disease, and everybody here is telling me I've passed this test and come back in a year, and I haven't had any of my questions answered. So over the next year, I pretty much did my own homework, went online, listened to different sources, trying to identify, people who seemingly had good information. And along that time continuum, I finally contacted or got introduced to Dr. Brewer, who was the antithesis of the experiences that I had with my doctor and my so-called cardiologist. So here we are today. Currently, I weigh 157 pounds. All my tests are significantly better than they were. Most importantly, my diet has completely been rebuilt. What I eat today, how I eat today, when I eat today is vastly different than 5 years ago. There's no question about it. I would say primarily, and what's funny is when I finally learned about good food, I'm not talking about good sugared food. I'm talking about good, healthy, nutritious food. That made, frankly, the urges that I used to have to eat change. It was when I finally learned diet, it seemed as if the weight just kind of went away. All my friends asked me, "How did you go from 200 to 157?" And I said, well, it is kind of funny because I learned about food. The one thing that I will say beyond 5 years ago, I was completely diet idiot. I didn't know much about food. I didn't know what was good, what was bad. I ate whenever I want, whatever high carb diet for sure, in whatever quantities I wanted. But I really didn't have any perspective about the importance of certain foods and so forth and so on. And once I did learn that, I lost interest in eating that. And when I substituted, let's say, more fats and more protein and far, far fewer carbs, the weight began to go away to the point now, for the first time in my life, I've gone 4 years now at 157 pounds. Okay, maybe I go to 158, maybe I go to 156, but that's it. And the diet is very comfortable and the portions are all very much different. So that is, what I would say has made a tremendous impact. But frankly, the nurse practitioner is the person that got me on this trajectory, looking for, and that test, it was academic before I got the cardio test. Everything is fine, so forth and so on. And when you get a high score, you realize for the first time, you do have an issue. You can't ignore it. You now need to do something about it. And frankly, one of my key lessons learned is you can't wait for the doctor to decide all the medical decisions that need to be made for you. You have to, activate. You need to be proactive. And if that's too much work, well, I can't really think what else is more important than that. I'm 72 years old. I'm not 45. I'm not 55. I'm older than most of you. So one lesson learned is it's never too late. If you're out there saying, I've always had a chronic weight problem, I'm cursed for life. Well, I would have said exactly that 5 years ago. I'm no longer saying it. It's simply a matter of that you just need to recognize that your health is important. You need to be proactive. There are people out there that do know what's going on. They're not tied to a dogma. Dr. Brewer is one of those people that understands that. Again, I'm not getting paid for this. I'm simply saying that I got so annoyed when my traditional doctor literally was of no help for all those years. I trusted his advice. And at the end of the day, it turned out I had disease. I was never going to know it. And this was going to progress. And inevitably, there was going to likely be an event. And then I would get the stent or I get the bypass, and that would be a great transaction for the hospital system, but that wasn't going to help me. So my passion today is I want to avoid a stent for the rest of my life. I want to avoid a bypass. And the information is there to do that. And one last point I'll make, and then I'll shut up, is when I was 45 years old, I would have said, I like my lifestyle. I'm going to eat this way. I'm going to eat the way I want. And if it means I die at 72, that'll be fine. Well, you know what? I'm 72, and it's not fine to die now. Because when
perspective has changed a little bit, hasn't it?
So when you're 72, I want to go to 92. So regardless of what your age is, watch out what you say, because you want to remain healthy forever. And you're not going to do that unless you take and assert, control over your life in terms of getting tested. The tests are there to determine if you have issues. And it's never too late. And, the last point is do whatever you can, notably diet, to reduce as much weight as you can if you know you have a weight issue. Because you don't have, I noticed differences from 200 to 180 to 160. So the point is, you don't need to go to a magical weight. But if you do lose weight, you lose body fat, it's going to make a big improvement. I mean, I feel much better than I ever did. So I'll pause right there.
And I will say really quickly, Dr. Brewer, I'm going to say this really fast. We did not coordinate that nurse practitioner information. That just happened to be divine intervention, right?
It was.
Are you sure you didn't pay Robert to?
Never met Robert, and this is my first time meeting him.
No, really.
And Jesus asked me for that slide last week because he felt like we needed to say it. So just happened to be.
No, I am all in. When Dr. Brewer and you, Jeannie, were chatting about nurse practitioner and why they really, really play a very strong role, I'm over here laughing because I'm saying they're never going to believe me now. But it is very, very true.
So the reason I had to run away was I heard a pounding at the door. On Wednesdays, I take my mom to walk, but somebody else brings her home. And I forgot that I had the key and locked her out. So she was doing fine, doing her gardening, and gave me a hard time.
Of course.
A couple more comments about engineering, and then we'll get into your story. The reason I brought up the engineering was one of the reasons why we asked Robert to come on the show is that he started whipping out some numbers and spreadsheets, and it was like, oh my goodness, reminded me of a couple of other engineers, Jerry Kurth, John, some others who had been on the show. And the engineering type presentations tend to do well on our group. And I've wondered about that. And I think one of the reasons is I've got a little bit of an engineering perspective myself. I worked for Toyota. I was senior management there, chief medical officer for North America for about 10 years. And at our level of management, we all had to take coaching. They were going to make an exception for me because I was medical, and they kept making exceptions for me on things. And I kept saying, no, I'd appreciate that. And it was very helpful. But I remember one of the things that my executive coach told me. She said, you know, I know you're a doctor, and I know doctors think differently. And we've gotten plenty of feedback that you're very good at what you do. But I have to tell you, you think like an engineer. So I think that there's a special interest among engineers on doing this. To that point, some of the groups in engineering, like Toyota, have gotten a head start on what they call preventive engineering, preventive maintenance, prevention. And unfortunately, the medical community is just sucking wind in that area. We are not doing well. You know, you have very few doctors going into prevention in the first place. The doctors that do go into prevention tend to go into public health and some of the more bureaucratic perspectives. And it's just not done that well. You see specialists like cardiologists, you get family practitioners, internists, other groups that have taken over and assume that they're doing all the prevention. They're not that, they make a lot of errors in that space. So at some point, you see growing interest in prevention. A lot of it is coming from the engineering community because of the appreciation for it. But anyhow, Jeannie, if you'll go ahead and give Robert the next slide, he'll start giving us his engineering presentation about engineering preventive maintenance for his body.
Is this the one we want to start with?
That's you, Robert. Lifestyle before 2018 was very sedentary. It was impulsive eating. Starting in 2018, as I mentioned, this was my totally new journey. Again, it was very scary to get a diagnosis that you have potentially a serious condition. So starting and that's what happened in 2018 when I realized, okay, I do have cardiovascular disease, because up until that point, I had been taking a low dose statin. And okay, I've done my job. I'm taking a statin, I'm doing everything. But because I did have elevated cholesterol. But on the other hand, it was, but do you have a problem? You may have elevated cholesterol, you may have but do you really have a problem? And it was only when I took the test, the calcium score test, did it actually prove beyond a doubt that I actually did have calcium in my arteries, potentially plaque. The plaque had to it had to start out as plaque. I didn't know if it was dangerous plaque or not, but that was the test that proved that I had a problem. Of course, it's scary, and now all of a sudden you need to get advice on what to do about it. So for a period of months, I was having a struggle because, as I said to you before, my doctor really wasn't to help. The cardiologist, okay, it's 10 months before I see the cardiologist again. So I learned in that period, I did a lot of reading on diet. And that I have to tell you, is one of the biggest rabbit holes I ran into in my life. I have never seen a subject where there are just alternate realities. I mean, as a society, medical community, there really is nobody really knows a lot about food. I mean, it was up and down. People were saying this diet is good and that diet is bad. These foods are good and these. So diet was really a struggle to finally sift through it and identify, what were the better diets. And at this point, I would say I've gone from about 350 grams of carbohydrates per day to on average under 100. Fundamentally, the major thing I did with diet was sugar. Immediately, and I started with, if it was a liquid sugar, if it's a sugar drink, if it was apple juice, orange juice, Coca-Cola, gone. That was out. And I would say 1/3 of all the useless calories or grams of carbohydrates was immediately eradicated that way. And then I learned about just sugar and food. And so today I would say I'm down to between 50 and 100 grams carbohydrates per day, particularly vegetables and some fruits to a large degree. A lot more fat, a lot more protein. Exercise, I am a runner. And one of the pre and post 2018 things that I did do correctly was I did like to exercise. So since 2018, I've upped my game. So I pretty much do jog 4 or 5 miles a day. And I mix that up when I can with high impact training, HIIT, which is mix up the jogging with occasional sprints for about 100 yards, which I do believe after reading a lot that is a good part. So I do have an exercise routine, and I no longer am losing weight. I'm pretty much exactly where I want to be, which is, for a better number, 157. Okay, 158, 156. That's it. So I've been able to control the weight. Medications and supplements. I do take a statin. I do take high blood pressure. I do take fish oil. I am a believer in taking K2. I think that's been, and I take a baby aspirin. So I do take some medications and supplements, which I feel very comfortable taking in adjunct to ensuring that I remain healthy with my diet. My sleep is very good. Certainly, I have to say, one of the things that really improved when I made this transformation is I sleep a lot better. I wear a Fitbit. I almost treat it as my Bible. I've used it enough where I almost know what I did today. And the supplements are good. The Fitbit really helps quite a bit in the exercise. So frankly, at this point, I'm in a pretty good case in terms of how I maintain myself. My last point that I would make here is, this may sound like, my God, you focused your retirement on remaining healthy and doing all this stuff. All this seems like work. And I have to tell you, that is absolutely the opposite. I've made a transformation from one lifestyle to another. I've adjusted to it. Now this is my norm. This is my reality, and it's very comfortable. Frankly, when I go out with friends and we go out to a restaurant, sometimes I am amazed at what they eat and how they eat. I never say anything. I'm very respectful. but what you eat, how you eat, and when you eat definitely is the key to the cornerstone for making all these other adjustments and getting to a good end.
I would think it would be interesting. So in a day, what does your diet look like?
Breakfast would look like eggs. I mean, the core of a breakfast would be eggs and maybe a couple of strips of bacon. Lunch would probably be a salad with tuna, salad with salmon. I'm big on salmon. I like to cook salmon. If I were to just make one prototypical, and dinner would be a variety of things. It would be, a protein. It would be, again, I like fish. I focus on fish a lot, but I do get, meat as times, good meat, that's that good meat without chemicals, grass-fed, that sort of thing. Meat, vegetables, asparagus, broccoli. I mean, cauliflower. I can make some really nice concoctions with those ingredients and mushrooms. And I do have, and small stack. And as from a snack point of view, it might be an apple. It might be some type of fruit. But I very much restrict. I don't want to eat frequently during the day. I mean, it's important to, moderate the eating during the hours. But occasionally, I'll have a small type of fruit. I still have a bit of a sweet tooth, but it's very, very. Maybe it'll be a half a cookie at times when I just want to splurge. Again. The one thing, when you get off the sugar, I mean, I probably have gone from if I was at 100 in terms of my sugar meter, I'm down to maybe a 5 or a 7 in terms of added sugar, 0 sugar, and in various foods, it's gone way, way down. And after about 2 or 3 weeks, when I was going through this, I finally was able to what I'd call kick the sugar habit, where if I were to eat a lot of sugar today, it would actually be very difficult. It wouldn't taste good.
And I know you've been with Dr. Brewer a long time. Sorry, Dr. Brewer, I'll just ask this really quick. Did you wear a CGM, the continuous glucose monitor, at all during this? And did it give you any information that, as an engineer, you put into a chart and helped you?
Great question. While I was going through this diet transition, I did have a Freestyle 2 Libre, and I did have that monitor, and I used that monitor for the better part of a year. And you are absolutely right. That really helped identify what foods would spike and what foods would not. So that is true. It was a great tool. It's and Dr. Brewer has said this many times, and that is there are generalities about food, like white bread will spike, and whole wheat will not spike as much. And I have to say that I found foods that were advertised to do one thing, they would, cause spike, that didn't cause spikes with me. So I use that to customize, okay, what are the foods I can eat that seemingly do cause glucose spikes? And also I began to learn, using the Freestyle Libre, that if I mixed different foods, let's say fats with certain sugars or proteins with certain sugars, the spiking would be different. In many cases, the spiking would be reduced. You didn't have quite the high shocks that you would get if you ate a bowl of white rice. So you're right. The engineer in me used that Freestyle Libre. I have my little notebook over here and I think the very first time I got a Freestyle Libre, I wanted to put the first thing that I did was I made a bowl of white rice and I just ate it. And then I came back like a half an hour later and I looked at the glucose meter, and sure enough, the thing had spiked like this. So I knew I could write that one off. Yes, white rice does cause spiking. And for the next several months, I used it to give me a good feel of cause and effect with different foods. And so I used that during that year when I went from one type of diet to another, what my normal routine would be, such that, it helps significantly in really reducing the height, the elevation, and the longevity of these high glucose spikes, which today is a fraction of what it was before.
Very good.
So Robert, I was going to ask you a couple of things. Number one of our viewers is asking, what did you do about dairy? Did you get rid of it entirely, or did you cut it back, or did you impact dairy at all?
I reduced it. I did not give it up. When you say dairy, I have to include cheese. And I have to say, cheese is one of my all-time loves in life. And so giving up cheese would be very, very hard for me. So I still eat cheese, but I definitely have cut back on that. But on the other hand, milk, unless I'm making something with milk, I tend to eliminate milk. But I don't use it every day as I once did.
So another question about a supplement. Have you heard of Gurmar or Gymnema Silvestre?
I have not.
Okay. It's an old Ayurvedic supplement, and the term actually stands for sugar killer. And coming from the deep South, the land of sweet tea and blackberry cobbler a la mode, I grew up with a significant sweets addiction. And it was only a few episodes of drinking something similar to a Gurmar tea that I realized that it really changed my perspective on sweets. I'm still an addict, but not nearly what I was. Big difference.
Yeah, probably one of the toughest things I have run into is, visit with friend, going to restaurants, and having to fight through the menu. One thing you do recognize when you really learn about sugar in foods, and learn how sugar, how it affects your body, how it affects, glucose in your system, insulin resistance, and all the rest of it. It's hard to go to restaurants and finding good food because, let's face it, restaurants use sugar, and almost most restaurants use sugar in all aspects of their cooking because it gives you the sensation that the food tastes good. So it is very difficult at times to order food or request that they modify it a bit or put the sauce on the side. But I'm not bashful about it. And so I've learned, okay, there are certain restaurants that are hopeless because, sugar are us. But that has been, so that still continues to be, hard with the restaurants.
We're getting another question while Jeannie's putting up your next slide. We're getting another question about Nema Tea and what it does. Actually, there are molecules in Nema which look enough like sweets molecules, different sugars, to where they'll actually cover that place on your palate. Most people, when they take Nema, make the mistake of taking the tablet or the pill, and it does have some central effect. It has some effect in the gut. It has some effect in the bloodstream as well. But the big place where I saw an impact was in the back of my palate, where you actually taste it. And it was interesting. I drank a lot of Diet Coke. I know that's a terrible thing, and for a lot of people. For me, it was always the lesser of two evils, with the bigger evil being drinking regular Coke. I'd heard people say, well, Diet Coke tastes like metal to me. After I did that, I did one of your engineering type things. I drank some Nema Tea and then drank some Diet Coke. Tasted like metal. So it's amazing what you can learn. So you want to tell us a little bit about your some of your labs on the next couple of slides?
Sure. On the oral glucose tolerance tests, that I would say that is a pretty typical test for me. My glucose runs from 90 to upper 90s. I would say in this particular one, that glucose was a little bit higher from the norm. And the insulin, those are typical numbers for me, a little bit higher than I would like, but it seems to be, what I've been getting. That is the I can't remember that's the microcrene. I can never pronounce that, Dr. Brewer, the MACR test of 3.
Microalbumin creatinine ratio.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, that's a 3, which I believe is very, very good, and shows very, very little leakage into the cell of the wall. The CRP high, the CRP inflammatory, that was 0.8. If I recall, that was elevated. Typically, I'm around 0.3 to 0.5. So the 0.8 was slightly elevated. I think if I recall, I probably had some sort of cold. As you know, that test can, just measures general body inflammation. So I probably had some sort of minor infection at the time. The MPO is a test for, again, inflammation, but inflammation in the cardio arteries at 336, which is in the range of very, very good. LPPLA2, that is another test that you can have for our cardio inflammation. And that 95, again, is in the very good range. And I mean, these are, just for the audience these are a sample of the type of testing that is available that you would want to do regularly. As a matter of perspective, Dr. Brewer and I generally agree that over the last few years, I've reached a point of stabilization where my numbers are in the good zone, and ergo, I'm maintenance rather than trying to further recover. So every 6 months, I get tested. These are some of the results of those tests every 6 months to confirm that I'm maintaining my program. So LP Placa 295, that again is looking for specific types of inflammation, within the artery walls. Again, if it was much higher, it would indicate that there's some activity that's going on that shouldn't be. The next one is a ratio of triglycerides with HDL. It's 1.3, which I think is very good. I think best would be getting close to 0. I mean, getting close to 1. But a 1.3 is pretty much at each time, and that is a good indicator. My LDL, 57, that's about where it is at the moment. And I mean, that's good. The next two numbers, HDL, large particle, LDL, patent A. I mean, this is a more detailed testing of cholesterol. This one is, I believe, Dr. Brewer, this is called a fractionalization, where it literally is breaking down the particles that are in your blood, the LDL, small, medium, large, HDL particles, small, medium, large. And it clearly indicates that, yes, I've definitely had, some level of carbohydrate dysfunctionality. So actually, I'll let Dr. Brewer, I always like to hear his explanation for the fractionalization. I think you would too.
So if you're okay with that, Robert, I've got your fractionalization from when? When was the most recent?
I
June.
think there was one.
June of this year. I can give some update as I discuss it.
Yeah, that would be good.
First of all, I wanted to talk about the go back. Yeah, the chart or the graph on the right. Quest used to send us those, and I did a couple of videos where we went into detail on it. Basically, what you're looking at is the bell curves for each of the two cholesterol groups. And that bell curve is very important because if you have a carb metabolism that's impacted, you start to lose the cholesterol in the larger, fluffier, quote, healthier particles, and it gets replaced with fatty acids. Well, when those particles that are carrying fatty acids instead of cholesterol pass through the liver uses it for energy. They metabolize it. So what we've seen over and over again for decades is that when you have a lot of small, dense LDL, you've got a problem. So you'll still hear people talking about the small, dense LDL is actually causing a problem. That may or may not be true, because when you find people that have a good LDL bell curve, they've got plenty of large, fluffy LDL, they tend to not have the problems associated with this classic small, dense area. So again, what we're looking at on the fractionation is looking to see if Robert's losing his large, fluffy HDL and or LDL. What happens in those curves is very different. Robert's HDL curve, which is on the right here, I mean the left, your left as you're looking at it here, and his LDL curve shows some impact, even as far back as as recently as 2020. What you have right here is sort of what I call a shark bite. What you should have is a symmetric bell curve, and the peak should be in a certain area. In terms of the numbers on the left, you'll see the HDL large, 6472. By the way, Robert, I don't know if you've seen it recently, but your HDL large last month was 9333, indicating that your carb metabolism is doing very well compared to what it was doing in the past. You're continuing to improve. And this HDL large number tends to take some time in order to start showing. The LDL pattern does something slightly different. Instead of getting that shark bite kind of phenomenon, the whole bell curve tends to skew. It just gets pushed to the right, where you start seeing more of the small dents and losing the large fluffy. Now, once you begin to understand that, you begin to start thinking about that old analogy of, is something is LDL, for example, the arson, or is it the fireman? You tend to see it around when there's a fire going on, but is it actually helping, or did it start the fires? Bottom line is, it may be neither one. It may just be a bioindicator. No matter what it is, it helps us understand what we need to be doing in terms of managing our preventive maintenance for our body. So instead of just doing a stress test on you and telling you, well, we think you're okay for right now, take a statin and and go home. We're giving you the things that change your metabolism, the things that are going to help you prevent having an event in your 60s and 70s.
Do you want me to go to the next slide, Dr. Brewer?
It's up to Robert.
I should just acknowledge on the last line. I do have elevated LP little a, which is 169. That number has been in all my tests. I think for those of you who aren't aware of LP little a, it's primarily genetics. There isn't I'll let Dr. Brewer talk about that, but it is genetics and it's very elevated. Whether or not it turns out to be a bad actor or not, I think has a lot to do with how you handle all the other metrics. And I think with that, I'll let Dr. Brewer fill in the rest.
Well, thanks, Robert. So yes, you do have an elevated LP little a. It's not uncommon. All of us have some level of it. But as you said, it's really a genetic tendency. You've also got the same debate about, is it the arson or is it the fire department? And some of us might, again, say maybe it's neither one, maybe it's a bystander, but a bioindicator. Bottom line is, given where we are on the internet and what we do, we get a lot of people with LP little a issues. Unfortunately, most docs don't even know about it because up until recently, there's been limited information on what you can do to improve it. Now, there's a supplement which impacts it. Our most common use of niacin is for folks with some elevated LP little a. I can tell you, as you mentioned, Robert, and as you know, cardiovascular disease is what we call a multifactorial thing. It's the carb metabolism is a huge deal. You have folks with FH, familial hypercholesterolemia. You get LP little a. You get a bunch of different things that we need to be aware of. Homocysteine and folks that have problems with their methylation. But the bottom line is you want to make sure that your arteries have a good lining. And if they have a good lining, they can usually take a little bit of LP little a. Clearly this kind of number. When people get to 400, 600, 800, then you start seeing problems even if they have a healthy lining. And so you're continuing to do what you need to do to protect the lining of your artery, keep that inflammation down. So a number of 169 for an LP little a does not cause concern. For me, if you look it up on the LP little a site, at any level, they get concerned. So I think, again, you have to be careful who you listen to and what they're saying.
Okay, we'll go to the next one.
So, Robert, did you want me to comment on that? or you first?
I would. Why don't you take a crack at that one? I mean,
So-
so you can set the pace.
So just a minute or two about what we're looking at. We've talked about CIMT multiple times. This is a CIMT from a group called Cardio Risk. They have their challenges, but they're one of the best in terms of two things, which are very important. One is quality control for the CIMT tech. And that is the biggest issue for CIMT activities. But the other one is also access. They do have a model where they send techs all over the country. Now, unfortunately, Todd has been on. Todd is the owner of that company, and he's been on the show a few times with me to talk about different components of the test, what it means. Basically, it's this. It's an ultrasound. So it doesn't have any ionizing radiation. It's not like even calcium score. People talk about calcium score having radiation. I'm really not worried about that level of radiation. It's low, it's manageable. But when you get somebody like I've had several patients in their 30s who've been getting a thallium stress test every year, that kind of radiation really starts adding up. Another challenge with this test is again what we call garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have a good quality technician, you're going to see stuff on here that's just not that repeatable. Now, a third problem is Todd uses these items here: early event risk in the CV event risk area, this little spreadsheet. All of these are clearly evidence-based. Average CCA, mean IMT, in other words, mean max, which you see in the next one, which sounds like a contradiction in terms. I'm not going to even go in and describe that. What I will say is, again, yes, they're all evidence-based, but as you see, they can tend to rate things or weight things towards the scary end. And if I've talked to one patient that I had to talk down off of a ledge, I've talked to dozens, maybe hundreds, who had some really scary numbers under this event risk area. Let's boil it all down and make it really, really simple, though. There's a couple of things you want to know. The first thing is, do I have plaque? If you have a number greater than 1.3 in any of these areas, you have what we call a discrete plaque. At that point in time, and not until, would I recommend that you take a statin and a baby aspirin, because at that point in time, it shows that you're getting to a point where you have significant risk. You've gone from low risk to moderate or higher for cardiovascular disease. Once that happens, and see, you don't need all of these numbers up here. You don't need the spreadsheet to know whether or not you've got a plaque. That's the simple question. Do you have a plaque or not? Then the second question, once you've documented that you've got a plaque and you need to go on statins and a baby aspirin, the next question is it stable? And these letters right next to it tell you yes or not whether it's stable. And as you see, Robert has 3 plaques, one in his right coronary, common coronary carotid artery, one in his right bulb. And if you're going to see plaques, usually you're going to see them start in the bulb. And on left, also, he has a plaque. But look at that. I'm jealous. I don't have this much. I have a couple of heterogeneous plaques. If you look up here, these 2 lines will tell you the whole story. Look for an area of 1.3 or greater. And if there's 1.3 or greater, you'll see a letter next to them. S equals soft. It's basically judging the amount of calcium in that plaque. And we did a couple of videos covering a thing called the Honda study. And the Honda study showed that as soon as you start getting calcification in that plaque, it has stabilized, and the possibility of having a plaque rupture at that point is minimal. Now, so people, once they get to this point, they've gotten the part of, okay, I've got a plaque. Now I'm looking and I don't have soft, I don't have echogenic, I've got heterogeneous. Well, doc, you're telling me that soft is dangerous, echogenic is safe. How about heterogeneous? Is it halfway in between? And the answer is no. It's more like 90% there. So what we're talking about is the biological process of forming a scar where that soft plaque used to be. As soon as you're forming calcium in that scar is a late stage process. So at the point that you're actually showing that you're depositing calcium, you're very stable. So a heterogeneous is like 90% of the way there. I don't know if you meant for me to go on that long, Robert, but I appreciate you putting that in there.
Dr. Brewer, do you want to talk about this graph?
Well, let's go back. Robert, did you have stuff on your more stuff on your CIMT to mention?
Yes, I do. This was my first test in 2021. Since then, I've had one in 2022 and 2023. So I've had the three, and I schedule this test in the spring of each of these years. And for me, everything that I've said in terms of all my efforts, so forth and so on, simplified, the CIMT test is for me the definitive proof in terms of how have I been doing. At the end of the day, is disease still active or not? Is my condition stabilized or not? And so by looking at this, the slide for 2021, 22, 23, have there been changes from year to year to year? And for all intents and purposes, what you see here in 21 is virtually the same as what I got in 22 and 23. So for these 3 years running now, it shows I don't have, the disease is stabilized. Everything is calcified. I don't have any soft plaque. And ergo, I'm clearly doing something right. So I would say the CIMT test, even more than the calcium score test, is really the best proof you can get in terms of, have all my efforts, am I doing well or not? Do I need to do more or not? And for me, this is really great news.
And we do have the 23 CIMT in a couple more slides. So
okay, I didn't know. Yeah. So I'm very happy with this. So I would highly recommend for those who are, kind of in the same boat, that the CIMT test is something you might want to consider. As are all these medications, supplements, exercise, diet, at the end of the day, how is it, is there activity in your arteries that you don't want, or is it now stabilized? And this is, for me, this is a great test, and it gives me a lot of confidence in insurance.
It is, and it's not that easy to access sometimes. It can be a headache, just like the OGTT and insulin response can be a headache. When you come to see us, the OGTT and insulin response and the fractionation and the CIMT tend to be 3 of the major tests that differentiate us from what you see in a typical cardiology office or internal medicine or family medicine office. We recommend the OGTT and insulin response first And that really helps us understand what level of glucose metabolism we have. Because when you look at it, we talk about it time and time again. We have a pandemic. We've been having a pandemic of type 2 diabetes and prediabetes that causes heart attack and stroke. And so if we've had a pandemic, it's not being recognized. 80% of the cases are not being recognized. Then it makes it really clear why we live in a culture that thinks, you can get into your 60s or 70s and it just happens. You can just be walking along and pass over dead from a heart attack or a stroke. No, that should not be the case. You should know whether or not you're at risk, and you should be able to prevent it. It's just that we're not looking at some of the key drivers. In terms of the testing, so the OGTT and IR, as well as fractionation, help us understand that usually vacant area where your carb metabolism is. Once you understand that, then you can start changing, pushing the buttons, pulling the levers that Robert has done, get your weight where it needs to be, do the right things, decrease your risk, and then develop a comfort level that you are where you are. Robert's using the CIMT the correct way as well, because that annual CIMT helps us confirm, yes, everything we're seeing on the labs, everything you know about your lifestyle that you've changed to create that stability, yes, it's actually working. Jeannie, you want to go to the next slide? You mentioned, if you'll go back to the previous slide, you hear a lot of terms about arterial age. Oh, my arterial age was really high. Arterial age is one of those that it has to do with garbage in, garbage out. It's very, very difficult to confirm that you got the right number. And again, that's where Todd's folks do really, really well. He learned from a guy that, and actually Todd has a doctorate in quality programs in medical systems. So he's got a good group there. And Todd doesn't pay me. I don't pay Todd. We argue and debate routinely about different things, but I got to give credit where credit's due. Here's how arterial age is obtained on these things. So when you go over to the right-hand corner, these diagrams tell you how the CIMT works. It's the common carotid, which is down here. Then you have what's called the bulb or bifurcation, which I mentioned a few minutes ago. Because of the dynamics of mixing mixing one stream or unmixing one stream into two, you get a little turbulence in that area. So if you're going to form plaque, usually it starts there. The internal carotid goes to the brain, so it's got a direct predictive value in terms of stroke, but it also has predictive value in terms of the heart as well. We can reach these arteries in the neck through that ultrasound without ionic radiation, without dangerous radiation. So that's what we do. And yes, the data's been collected to see what's the probability of having no plaque here, but having plaque here in the heart, and it's less than 2%. So that's a couple of the background facts about this activity. Now, a lot of people will say, "Oh, yes, we do ultrasound of the neck," and they're not talking about CIMT. Here's what they're talking about. They're basically doing what we call a flow study. They will tell you at the end of their ultrasound of the neck, you've got a blockage of 10%, or you've got some plaque, but it's only blocking like 20%. That doesn't tell us anything. The Princeton Prevention Center has already made it very clear in some of the work they did. 2/3 of the people that have a heart attack or stroke have less than 50% blockage. Now, why does that matter? Because in standard medicine world, you don't really get a reaction until you're blocking more than 50% of the flow. A stress test, for example, is not going to show positive until you get a 50% blockage of flow. So that's why things like stress tests really don't predict a heart attack. So what we want to know is how much plaque you have. Now, when you get to this arterial age business, so basically the difference between a CIMT and a flow study is the CIMT actually looks at this this space over here. It's called IMT. It's labeled that. Are you able to see my pointer, by the way? No? Okay.
No.
In the on the right, the image in black and white, that's an actual CIMT image. It's not Robert's. It's an actual model, though. The arteries, as you can see, the black part where the blood's flowing is called the lumen. Then that tiny, thin white line down on the bottom is the intima layer. The thicker white line below that is the media layer, the muscle layer that gives it the strength so it doesn't blow apart with a pressure of 120/80. There's a thin black line between those two. That thin black line is where LDL deposits. It's also where you get inflammation. You get the fluid associated with inflammation. You get MPO, which Robert mentioned, which we test for. You get myeloperoxidase, LPPLA2, the enzymes that actually attack that plaque. And those enzymes from our immune system attack that plaque because our body doesn't want it there either. So it's like several other things in medicine. It's not so much the plaque that kills us, it's the immune response to it. You see that in things like COVID storm. In most cases, the deaths from COVID were not just from the virus itself. They were more from what we called cytokine storm, our immune system just going crazy and out of control. So back to the CIMT. The difference between the CIMT and the flow study is that we're actually measuring this area. They take about 600 cuts microscopically or digitally on the image, and they say, okay, you can see it's a little bit ratty, a little bit uneven, so that's why they take the 600 cuts. They average them, and then they put those numbers together. So Robert's average IMT, if I weren't getting so presbyopic, I could see it, 0.9 millimeters. So the average, or it's an argument, a debate to say what's actually average. We'll see in just a minute what the average is for Robert's age. It's in a thing called the nomogram down at the bottom of the report, and that's on the next slide. So this is a nomogram. Patient arterial age compared to U.S. males and female populations. Guess which ones are males and which are females? I don't hear either one of you answering. I think it's immediately obvious. Blue is for boys, pink is for girls. Now, the couple of things that comes up from this is the first one is, you assume that the fact that men have heart attacks earlier, not more. Women die mostly from heart attacks too, just like men. People often don't think that. They think it's breast cancer or one of the female organ cancers, and that's not the case. You do have those, obviously more than you have with men, but women have heart attacks just like men, and it is the number one cause. But when you look at these lines, you see why women tend to have heart attacks later than men. They tend to form plaque later than men. So the first assumption would be, well, maybe this is a testosterone thing. But look at the numbers down here. Age 13, when testosterone is starting to crank up, or 12 or 10, you've already started to see this difference between men and women, or boys and girls, and plaque deposition. So we don't really understand everything we sometimes think we do. Anyhow, back to Robert's case. Robert had a number of, go back, what was it, 0.993, is that right? Okay, 0.93. Okay, let's go back and look. The way you do this you estimate Robert's age is you go to 0.93 on the left-hand side, the vertical side, and then you travel over to the right until you get to his age, which is 72. You see a little red dot there. So that's what that red dot meant. That meant that Robert's arterial age was higher than his
He was
chronological.
69, I think, on this one. He was 69.
Right. And so the
Yeah.
typical, you see the typical person that has a 0.993 is way over here on the right. It's over 77 years old. So you go back up to the top after using that nomogram. You go back up to the previous slide and you see why they estimated his number at 78, arterial age of 78. So thanks to both of you for giving me a minute to describe that. I know there are people on the videos that were curious on how this thing works.
Good. I'll take it to the next set of labs. These are from 2023.
Yes. I think for the most part, they're similar. Again, the HSCRP was elevated in this case. I know at the time I had a cold and I still took the test. But in terms of the oral glucose test, those numbers, again, were pretty consistent with others. Insulin resistance, similar. The ratio was similar, MPO. So this, for me, this is a good, this show for 2023, I like these numbers. And as Dr. Brewer was talking before, the HDL large number over 9,000. So comparing this, and that is a point. Doing this regularly, you now can compare. You know, is this, if it was good before, is it similarly good? So I would look at this in 2023 and say, for the most part, these numbers are great because they're good and they're consistent with what I've been doing the last 2 years. Book it. So I would be happy with these numbers.
I would
Dr.
be
Brewer,
happy with those as well.
On the LDL large and the small and the medium, they've changed a little bit. What would you attribute that to more than likely?
Well, we do see some variation with these. And again, there are things that happen, even though there are things that happen in terms of variation that we don't understand. Robert could have had some stressful time periods, which he may or may not have recognized. That may have made his glucose metabolism a little bit more challenging. You see HDL large, it fluctuated a little bit. Right now it's in a good place. And I think Robert is as well. Overall, we tend to see when you get poorer numbers, you're getting into poorer control in terms of the most important part of fractionation being the HDL large and the LDL pattern. We don't have LDL pattern on this one, but we looked at it on the previous slide, and it was an A pattern, which is nice and healthy.
Now, he was in a B pattern at one point and then went to an A pattern.
Correct. So
anything there?
Same thing. You know, you bring up a really good point, Jeannie. We go through these things with patients, and patients will sit and politely listen sometimes when I'm going on and on and on. And then they say, well, that's good, but what do I do about it? And it's, it all gets back to the same thing. As Robert mentioned before, this is a multifactorial thing. So the things that we talk about, body composition, decreasing body fat, increasing muscle metabolism, good sleep, decreasing the amount of time that your blood sugar's over 140, decreasing the amount of time that your insulin is over 10, and clearly over 50. All those things are improving your, what we would call your oxidative state. diabetes is an oxidative process. And when you read books like David Sinclair's book, Lifespan, an oxidative state needs to be managed. It's, you read about the mitochondrial theory of aging. The mitochondria are the furnaces of the cell. And, for those of us like Robert and myself who, many of our cells are 66 years and older, and we got some old mitochondria in there, some old furnaces. Some of them have been damaged by this oxidative process, and we need to be able to clean it up.
Okay, we'll go to the next slide. We're kind of getting close to question and answer time, it looks like.
Yeah.
So anything on this one, fellas?
You first or me, Robert?
I mean, I look at, again, from a statistical point of view, some of the numbers are 1/10 higher or lower than going back to this slide from 2021. So from a statistical point of view, this one is virtually the same as, I would submit statistically, this is virtually the same as what we looked at in 2021. So I conclude that the disease is, it hasn't increased, it's calcified, it's been pretty dormant. And if I could get these numbers moving forward, I would say that's as good as it's going to get for me.
So it's stabilized more than
Very
likely,
stabilized.
right, Dr. Brewer?
I would agree with 100% in everything I heard. And as good as it's going to get, sometimes it may sound like a compromise. That's not a compromise. This is very stable. If you go back and you look at the Honda studies, this is a very practical goal. It's achievable by everybody. Getting plaque stability. Reversing arterial age is not so practical. I've seen it in 3 people, and I'm one of them. It's not a practical goal, but stabilizing your plaque and reducing it does the same thing. It reduces your cardiovascular risk the same way. And that is attainable by just about everybody.
Okey-doke. One more graph.
Pretty much. Yep.
Same thing.
Pretty much
Same
the
story?
same thing. Yeah.
Yep. Well, I think it is. I am the gatekeeper today, it seems. Dr. Brewer, does it seem like it's time to go to question and answers and thank Robert for all of his wisdom?
Yep, Robert, I appreciate you being here. As we said before, it really helps. We talk about theory a lot. We talk about different things that we're finding in the science, but it really makes a difference to go through the details of what we look at, talk to a patient, someone who's been through the process. It really helps viewers, and we're seeing a lot of that with some of the comments. I've been trying to respond to some of those as well. And as we said before, somebody who's got a little bit more of that engineering perspective likes to look at the levers and pulleys to impact and record it and share it. I appreciate you doing that.
Well, I also would like to thank you. I mean, Dr. Brewer, you've been a very, very big factor here over the last several years. I mean, I would not have gotten to this point. I would not have had the information that has given me, the energy and the conviction and the focus to carry on and spend the time that I do to maintain my health. So I do want to thank you very much. And I look forward to many, many more years where we can be talking about my CIMT test.
I do too. I expect, so you're 72. I expect maybe 40, 50 more years of this for you.
Oh, you're very, very funny.
You may read David Sinclair's book, Lifespan. You may reconsider that. So anyhow, thank you again. And Aspen, if you'll give us the transition, we'll go into Q&A. Thanks for staying, Robert. A lot of the questions when we have a guest often go to the guests themselves. So it's good to have you here. And by the way, I do play a little bit of golf in this version of my retirement. I'm not very good at it, but I enjoy it. But I don't enjoy it nearly as much as being able to work with folks like you. And we'll hear it every month on the show that, you know what, we just looked at your videos. We started learning some things, and your information saved our life. So what better retirement can you have than that?
Yes.
And it looks like we have Melissa in the Philly Burbs. Good morning, Melissa. You've been active on the show this morning, I see. Let's see what else we got here. We got John Pertard. Jay Pertard. Sorry, I'm not as good at Jesus as this.
Well, you sort of got surprised with it today. Jesus
I did.
need to train you a little bit.
Right. And this looks like Jay. We had a comment earlier about residency. I think after nurse practitioners, and then this was Jay Petard talking about sleep, Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, which I know you've talked about before, Dr. Brewer, and residency and sleep deprivation. So that was interesting.
Oh, you've hit a nerve for me. I mentioned early on the frustration with the first 2 years of med school. Residency was much more practical in terms of actually doing work with people. However, there was now regulation is starting to manage that issue, but there's been a major thing about badge of honor in medical training, and it has to do with the longer you stay up, the harder you're working. And I agree. I could not agree with you more, Jay, that it's dangerous, and they have demonstrated that it's dangerous to do that badge of honor kind of perspective. And thank you for that comment. Thanks for letting me go into my mini rant on that.
There's Melissa saying that there's a nurse practitioner in our cardiology office, and they are much more attentive and listens much more than the MD. Not that we don't appreciate MDs. We just want to make sure we say that. But that's always nice to say. Here's something here, Dr. Brewer.
78, just started the last third of my life. Or let me see, maybe what's 5 over 12, the last 5/12 of his life. I've had prostate cancer in remission, and realize I'm the one who can influence how much of that last third I get, or last 50 years. I agree with you. Thanks, Harvey.
Let's see here.
There's one person is asking, how old are you? I think they're asking me. I'm 66. They may be asking Robert, and Robert shared a couple of times he's 72.
And I'm 53 if they're asking me.
Okay. I wasn't going to ask you, but thank you for offering that. Stephanie Weisinger, I've been following you and a couple of others since 2020. I lost 35 pounds and have done 99% of what's recommended. Many improvements in my health, 0 meds. Now, after 3 years, I have joint pains, wrist and hip. Uh-oh. Wonder what's going on there.
Don't know. But good job losing the 35 pounds for sure.
This is the first time I've seen someone write in from India. Syed Arib Hassan. Good evening from Delhi, India. Thank you so much, Syed, for joining us.
And it looks like there's a new member too. Woody Woodring became.
Thank you so much, Woody. And we've got someone from Stockholm, Sweden. One of the most fun vacations I had was Stockholm during the midnight sun. We would go to bed about midnight and the sun was still up.
Yeah. Melissa has a question here. Dr. Brewer, are you still at risk of a heart attack or stroke when it's echogenic?
There's no way you get to absolute zero risk, but if you look at the Honda study that I referred to a couple of times, it basically did what's called a life study analysis. It's what the actuarials use to come up with the rates that the insurance companies will charge for life insurance. It's what's called a Kaplan-Meier curve. Basically, it's a curve of, you start with like 100 people, and every time somebody dies, you go down one notch. And so obviously what you want is to go straight. And this is what happened. They took two different groups. They took one group that had zero calcium in their plaque. It was soft plaque. And it was a little over 100 people. And then you took another group that had calcification in their plaque. And I don't remember the exact numbers. I think it was like over the next 4 years, there were like 20 or 30 events in the group that had no calcium. There were three or four events in the group that had calcification, but all of those events actually occurred in the very beginning of the study. So it also implied that, dang, number one is a huge difference in terms of risk for these two groups. And number two, you actually even wondered if these people were just getting to a place where they were starting their stable journey.
Well, very good. And I think, is this time, Dr. Brewer, since we need to get out there and see our patients?
Yeah. What time? You're starting in 15 minutes, right?
Yes. Yes, I am.
And I am starting. Gosh, we didn't get much time to get to questions today, but it was a very, very practical presentation. I can't thank you enough, Robert, for sharing your information with the group.
Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Sorry about the hiccups with my trying to be a Jesus today, but I'm learning.
I think you did great. Thank you very much. And for those that have tuned in, sorry we couldn't get to nearly as many questions today. I think you see why. It was a very practical presentation of what you do when you start getting deeper in terms of managing your cardiovascular risk with us. Thanks for joining us today.